episode of Surviving the Survivor, we bring you the best guests in all of true crime. Don't forget to subscribe and smash that like button. Here's your host, Emmy Award-winning broadcaster, Joel Waldman.
What's up, STS Nation, and welcome to another episode of Surviving the Survivor. It is the podcast that promises to bring you the very best guests in all of true crime. And this is a show so good, it has its own name and happens every Friday. Great Scott, your true crime Phil. What a day, what a year 2025 has been. Started with a horrific terror attack, horrific wildfires going on, burning LA to the ground. Finally got, I don't want to compare or contrast, but I got stuck in traffic. Scott Duffey had computer problems and my notes disappeared on me, but they're back. So 2025 has suddenly turned around. Fil Waters, you're a man of faith. What we're seeing out in Los Angeles is of biblical proportions. Literally, my wife is from there. We did a fundraising show on it. Your thoughts? Will LA be able to rebuild and come back from this monstrosity of a disaster?
First, I wish you guys Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.
And I want to take credit for being the first one here today on the broadcast. That you two were late. So I need to get a gold star for that. In regards to the fires out there, of course, I have two children and their families that live in California, but it's fortunate they're miles away, 120 miles away. You know, I mean, this is not something that wasn't foreseen. This has been going on in California, the fires and so forth, for decades, for years. There's nothing new about this. The problem is that the management of the forest areas, the wooded areas, the land, the water, by a variety of local and state authorities has been abysmal. And
well, the mayor thought it would be a good idea, knowing in advance that they were expecting horrible winds. She thought it'd be a good idea to take a trip to Ghana.
This isn't the first year the winds have come in, okay? Yeah. This stuff has been going on for, if not decades, centuries. This is the way it is in Southern California. So, and I won't even, I'm not even going to get off into a discussion about specific people involved in this. That will unleash, I'm sure, the haters in a new torrent. But, and it's been going on for a long time, but poor management of the land, of the forested areas, of the wooded areas, all to, some sort of, I don't know, fish or something they've been trying to say. It's ridiculous what they've been doing out there. And then you have the problems with the water. They have the Pacific Ocean that sits right next to them. The reservoirs weren't taken care of. Fire hydrants running out of water. The fire department is in shambles. A lot of crap going on there that's just so totally unnecessary. And so you have the perfect, not any pun intended, but you have the perfect storm here for this type of thing that the forecasters have been predicting that something like this was going to happen, catastrophic, because of those conditions. And so we have it, and it's horrible. Pacific Palisades looks like a war zone. Yeah. It has been completely leveled, and it's horrific. There are no words to describe what those folks have gone through. There is perhaps nothing more destructive than to the human condition than fire. Water, flooding, that kind of thing is very destructive as well. But fire is especially in a fire like this, fires like this, It is all consuming. So, of course, my prayers to go out have been going out for those folks, giving them strength and courage and endurance, and trying to get these things under control. I heard this morning coming to the office that I believe there's a third of the fire that is contained. That doesn't mean it's been eliminated, but it's contained. So that's encouraging. Obviously, what the ideal situation would be is for the rains to come in and put this stuff out. But they're doing it's an amazing job that they're doing out there in terms of the firemen that are on duty, the firemen that are coming in from all over the place to support them under really conditions that never should have occurred. And so I'm gonna tell you that and they don't know what the source of this is. It may be the same. It's the same situation, but it's 1,000-fold that we had in Maui. And I'm telling you, people in positions of responsibility that have to respond to these kind of catastrophic events, if you don't put people in there that are experienced and their job is to take care of the community in regard to whatever form of public safety they are in, if you have a bunch of appointees that are in there that are trying to socially engineer their departments to satisfy a political agenda, this is what happens. It happened on Maui. It's happening in LA. So a lot of these things are problems created by very, very irresponsible people in positions that have made some really bad decisions. And that may be decisions, that may be just omissions. They just don't want to respond to what they're being told that could happen because they're more concerned about some sort of image they're trying to project. So, and that's just the truth.
Yeah.
About this. I'm not trying to make a political statement. I was telling this is the reality. So,
yeah. Scott, I knew Phil would have nothing to say on it.
That are picking up the slack and trying to get this thing under control.
Yeah. By the way, it was fun to watch. I like when real people, citizens. There's a mom in the Pacific Palisades. By the way, there's an unbelievable image. I don't know if the COE can find it. And also, COE, I sent you something a little fun for the end of the show today. I just texted it to you. But there's an image in Pacific Palisades. Everything is destroyed. But Old Glory, the American flag, is waving. And I saw that. I thought of these two guys. I thought of a lot of other guys who have, served the nation. It's a wild picture. Everything is destroyed except for the flag. But I enjoyed watching. There was a mother, wife, citizen from the Pacific Palisades who happened to catch Gavin Newsom outside his SUV, and she ripped him a new you-know-what, and it was hilarious because these guys are all sound bites all the time, both sides of the aisle. This is not political, both sides of the aisle, and she just teed off on him. Scott Duffey, number one, you've been bringing us a story through photographs. It's such an interesting background. I can't tell if it's a photo, green screen that you've got going on, if that is an actual cutout of someone. Want to know where they can get a Scott Duffey cutout. They would sell out. I wouldn't be able to keep those in stock. But what is behind you in that photo?
So yes, it's a photo on my green screen, if that's the correct terminology. So as I said, when I started doing this, as long as I can continue to bring photos, to speak through photos, this was a photo taken back, I believe, in 2015 or 16, where I went with a homicide detective from the Delaware State Police. We made a trip to DC to drop off some evidence, and then took him on a tour of the FBI experience, and that's in FBI headquarters, open to the public. It is open to the public with after you Put in your name, your request, and so forth. Get a quick background. And this is the desk of J. Edgar Hoover on display, so you can post for photos with all the different artifacts of the FBI throughout history.
Oh, look at this. Mish Cavernos. That's a beautiful story, Scott. With us for 15 months. By the way, there is news with Donna Adelson, and so we're doing an additional show, which is another reason I was scrambling at 3 p.m. Eastern time. There was an in-camera hearing before the last trial, and transcripts were released. Not really. Long story short, they're bits and pieces of that transcript, and we now know what happened in that in-camera meeting in the judge's chambers. So Tim Jansen, I think Joe Patuto are going to join us, but definitely Tim at 3 p.m. So it is a stocked day, and the COE wants to rip my ears off because she wants the weekend to be here. Scott Duffey, I'd be remiss if I did not ask this. Did you ever want to be a firefighter, or did you always know you wanted to be a police officer and then eventually an FBI agent?
Yeah, I never wanted to be a firefighter. It just wasn't in my blood. But my sister's family, I believe all of them are associated with their volunteer fire departments. Echo Hose, shout out to Echo Hose in Shelton, Connecticut. And I think another department that they associate themselves with. So having been in Lower Marion as a police officer, we had quite a few volunteer fire stations, and I would make it a point to stop in each one, get to know all the different members throughout the township, because of it's all volunteer. And just imagine not getting paid for putting themselves in danger. They enjoyed it. It's great camaraderie, but still a very dangerous job. So
Yeah.
hats off to them. Hats off to LA. But no, I did not want to be a firefighter.
There you go. By the way, we're going to dig into JonBenet Ramsey. You may have heard of her. It's been going on for 30 years. In just a moment, Fil Waters needs to settle the score. You know, Phil, there's an Army-Navy game. I don't know why there's not a Marines game, but anyway, there's Army, Navy, police, firefighters, settle the score. Are police tougher than firefighters? Are firefighters tougher than police? Or are you guys equal? I don't want to stir up any controversy here.
What was your question?
I guess who's tougher and braver, police or firefighters, Fil Waters, in your mind's eye?
Are what? Say that again.
Who's tougher, police or firefighters? This is a politician trying to get it. Yeah.
You know, you're talking about two different.
Did you ever want to be a firefighter, Phil?
Scott, I never had the desire to run into a freaking burning building. So
yeah,
I would just I think it's two different. It's apples and oranges. I don't know that. And now in a football game, I mean, they got their guys, we got our guys. So I don't know. It depends on who wins. But
Phil, you never wanted to be a firefighter?
I tell people all the time, you know, people love firefighters. That's the big difference, right, Scott? People love firefighters. The cops, you know, it's a toss of the coin. So, but I do kid my firefighter friends, because I tell them you don't have a real job because you only work like 3 days a month. And what do you do at the fire station? You cook. And then you've got these real jobs that you take care of. In fact, the guy that painted my yellow Ferrari, he's a Houston fireman, but he's got a body shop. So,
is he still painting?
No, they're really good. Listen, I tell you what, not to tell a morbid story here, but we had 4 Houston firefighters that were killed in a collapse on a burning building while I was on duty. And of course, we made the scene. Homicide made that scene. There was some discussion about possible criminality because of the condition of the building and so forth and so on. But and we are impacted as police officers when a firefighter is lost as well. They are a fellow public servant, and I can tell you that was a heartbreaking scene to be on, just to have to be there to do that job. My observations of the firefighters, the police officers, I mean, it was unbelievable. And so no, those guys that do that job, amazing individuals, and they're willing to put themselves in harm's way in a way that the rest of us won't. So kudos to those guys.
Yeah, for sure. Real heroes out there. Drives me crazy. They're interviewing Mel Gibson instead of they got to interview the firefighters, but they're too busy. But anyway, good to see Mish here coming to us from Cape Town, South Africa, letting me know that they are all tough. Mish, what do you think of men in uniforms? A lot of women like men in uniforms. Friday's a little more casual. You got STS singles. Sounds like neither Phil nor Scott wanted to deal with running into burning buildings. I don't think I would have done too well doing that. And I don't think I would have done too well tackling perps. This is about JonBenet now. Let's dig into this. So this is obviously the death of 6-year-old JonBenet. It's a case that's remained a haunting mystery for 28 years. For those who've been living under a rock, I'm just going to kind of rewind here. That's what we're doing. Firefighters and police are first responders. They're all brothers and sisters, Vesper. There are women who do the job and do it well. December 26th, John and Patsy Ramsey, they wake up to find out that JonBenet, who's a child beauty queen, is missing. They find a handwritten ransom note demanding $118,000. That happens to be the exact sum, the exact number of John Ramsey's bonus from that particular year, which is a lot of money back then. It was discovered on the kitchen stairs. 7 hours after that, John Ramsey finds his daughter's lifeless body in a small room in the basement. An autopsy determines that JonBenet was essayed and strangled. Her skull was fractured. We then come to find out, I believe it was later on, about the unknown DNA, which we're going to get into, found under her fingernails and in her underwear. Let me start with Scott here. Scott, obviously there's a new doc out right now, which is very popular, called Cold Case, Who Killed JonBenet Ramsey, which is also controversial because John Ramsey was involved with the production of it with a director named Joe Berlinger. They collaborated together. Now, Joe Berlinger said that the Ramseys are one of the most victimized families. A quote from him, from the director of this documentary, says, obviously, he wasn't legally wrongfully convicted, but he was wrongfully convicted, Berlinger said. And his wife, Patsy, who passed away from cancer, by the way, in 2006, I believe, the family were wrongfully convicted in the court of public opinion. Scott, just kind of broad brush strokes. I mean, this is the cold case of cold cases. Everyone knows the story, 3 decades old. And now, basically, they're saying that they've got hope. I'm about to play some sound for you. And some of it is from the Boulder Police Department, the new brass at the Boulder PD, saying that they are going to find this person in 2025. What are your general thoughts about this when it first happened to where we are today?
Yeah, as I've talked off air with you guys, this is something that I followed closely when it happened. Whatever was in the news, I was taking notes, as an active police officer. This is when I was still a police officer before I'd gone into the FBI. I was in the last leg of the process for the FBI. And this really caught my attention, not only because, like any other national news, it captures you. The victim being a 6-year-old. and then, of course, to see everything that's come out early on, I will absolutely say maybe it's because of the way things came out. Maybe it's because of law enforcement, etc., putting things out there that I think, like many other people, pointed the finger at somebody in the family from within the household. And then as years went by, sticking with that principle, I can go either way. I am on the fence because, like anything else, like anybody else who is not a part of the actual investigation, we only know what is put out there, and often what is put out there with somebody's opinion. And I, taking a common sense approach as well as an investigator approach to what where's the evidence taking you, et cetera. So I've been all over the map on this one, especially with the what has been coming out, not only in the last year with regards to media attention, but since the 20th anniversary with the CBS special, followed by a 2020 rebuttal, and then I realize um, there are things that absolutely point towards the direction within the family. And then having seen rebuttals that I can totally open to, hey, wherever the evidence is going to take you, is the evidence, the DNA evidence recovered, et cetera, is that going to be relevant? That's a question I have. Um, and ultimately, I think, like many, um, now say, hey, give me something as an investigator that points me one way or the other. Um, so I will continue to sit on the fence, open-minded to this, and see where it takes, as well as I believe now Boulder, Colorado, and whatever support they're getting, that this has to be looked at fresh eyes, zero opinions, and follow the evidence. But it may just come down to um, no prosecution may ever see the light with regards to this young victim.
As Tay pointed out, Steve Thomas is a detective. I've got some sound. There was a clip a while years ago on Larry King Live where he confronted the Ramseys, believing that they are responsible. Fil Waters, if you look on the screen here, this is one of the 2.5 pages of the ransom note. Listen carefully. It starts, you will withdraw 118,000, which again, Phil, was the sum of his bonus that year, the exact amount. This is what you would call a clue. Are you, given your career, Phil, Phil was retired for 11 years when this happened, but no, I'm joking. Phil was still active, working hard. But Phil didn't like that joke. Phil, are you surprised all these years later, 28, 29 years later, that this is still unsolved?
I don't know that I would, I don't know I'd use the word surprised. I guess I'm disappointed more than anything else. This case kind of held a special interest for me for a time. This happened in 97. I was in my second year in homicide, and the chief of police in Boulder, Tom Kobe, was a retired deputy chief, assistant chief with the Houston Police Department. So that kind of drew my attention to the case. And I worked with people at HPD that had worked with Chief Kobe. And so I was a little, as we got further into it, and then the case starts to unfold and the details start to come out about what the police initial response was to it and how they handled it and so forth and so on. Again, I like I said, I kind of use the term disappointed because there were just some basic things that should have been done that weren't. I mean,
such as.
Well, some police 101 stuff. When the patrol officer gets there and addresses the issue,
Scott, did he just
as a
freeze?
missing person case. So you do those things that would lead in that direction. You get all the information you can from the parents, and I'm gonna use generic terms here because this is what you would do in this type of an incident. So once they get there and they determine that they have a missing person, they have a missing child, then you couple that with the fact that you have a ransom note. So this would, to me, this would indicate, if I'm that patrol officer, that we not only have a missing child, but we have a kidnapping. With that knowledge, I would have immediately made a phone call to Homicide, who works kidnappings, and turned it over to them. I would have notified them. A pair would have been sent out. The FBI would have been involved, and it would be worked as a kidnapping. And that's the way we would have worked it in Houston. In Boulder, I'm just, I don't know if it's a lack of experience. I don't know if it's because Boulder, I mean, it's a college town, right? That's where University of Colorado is. And you don't see these types of things happen in a setting like that. So maybe a lack of experience and so forth and so on. And I think maybe the lack of experience then starts to reveal itself later on when you look at, again, just basic steps that were not taken and the scene wasn't secured. When the detective gets there, I mean, you've got the family searching the house. That's insane. Yeah. Again, and I'm just saying the way I would have approached this.
Yeah.
And the criticisms that have been made, I think, are righteous. And so they search the house, and then they get there, and then the house is searched again. It's and then all of a sudden you got John coming up out of the basement or that room that, holding her. Mm-hmm. And then you've got the distractions of the mother, and then you've got this note and the craziness of the note. But again, it should have been turned over immediately to the homicide division, the people that would work a kidnapping, because that's what this is at the very beginning. Yeah. And then once you get detectives involved, again, I don't know the scope of this detective's experience at all. I don't think she was terribly experienced. Not her fault. It's just that, again, Boulder's not the type of town that you would see these things happen frequently. And then you've got, as this right here where Mary is talking about, you've got all these people that start to show up because, people that don't need to be there. And that's one of the first rules is you secure that scene and nobody gets in there. And if there is anybody that is going to be in and out of that house, you need to have an officer posted at the front door, and he's making a log about who came in there and who left. So, again, I'm just going to, I think it's a lack of experience on the part of the department itself for working something like this. And then it just snowballs from there. Once you start, once that little hole in the dam gets created, eventually the dam is going to break. And that's what happened in this investigation. And so it goes off into all sorts of bunny trails and confusion, Then you get the DA who's trying to get involved in the thing for what it looked like political purposes. I mean, the whole thing was a catastrophe, the whole investigation. And I don't think that's a big secret. I mean, everybody knows that. Yeah, it's just from the very beginning, this thing was destined to be a failure. And I don't know how you ever, well, you don't. You cannot unring that bell. And in these types of investigations, you get one bite at that apple. And they got that bite and then they spit it out. It just went off the rails from there on, from that point forward. And even bringing in people and trying to redo things and this and that and this and that. There's so much that you lost on the front end that it has caused the confusion and the lack of closing that case on the back end. So it's just been horrific.
Yeah. Well, listen,
investigation.
We've got quite a bit of sound. Even in looking in the chat here, Buttercup says there weren't that many rooms to miss her body. Then Angie here is saying, why did the Ramseys not work with law enforcement but work with news sources very quickly? The ransom note specifically says not to call authorities, which they did when they not right away, about 7 hours later. But there's so many questions is my point that is lingering. This is the new chief of the Boulder Police Department. It's a long thing. So when I get bored, or I can tell Phil and Scott are bored, we'll stop it. But this is what he has to say about the current state of the investigation.
Hello, my name is Stephen Redfern, and I serve as the police chief for the city of Boulder, Colorado. I'm speaking to you today on behalf of the Boulder Police Department to give an update on the investigation into the murder of JonBenet Ramsey. As many of you know, this horrible crime happened in December of 1996, and our officers responded to investigate. While I was not at Boulder Police 28 years ago, I have worked in policing for more than 20 years, and I want to assure you that our agency is committed to doing everything we can to bring justice to JonBenet and hold her killer responsible. So much of how law enforcement works has changed in the last 30 years. There are a number of things that people have pointed to throughout the years that could have been done better, and we acknowledge that is true. However, it is important to emphasize that while we cannot go back to that horrible day in 1996, our goal is to find JonBenet Ramsey's killer. Our commitment to that has never wavered. For years, our detectives have partnered with multiple agencies across the country, including our federal and state partners like the FBI and the Colorado Bureau of Investigation, as well as several outside forensic labs and DNA experts, to evaluate the latest advancements in technology, viable tips, and investigative leads. Our collaboration also includes the Colorado Cold Case Review Team, which is a panel of outside experts brought together in December of 2023 to review this case, generate additional investigative recommendations, and determine if updated technologies and/or forensic testing might produce new intelligence or leads to solve this case. That review took a year to prepare for and included an intensive effort to digitize all evidence to create a comprehensive and searchable database containing thousands of information files. Those files include more than 21,000 tips, over 1,000 interviews, which were conducted across 17 states and 2 foreign countries, samples from more than 200 different individuals, including handwriting, DNA, fingerprints, and shoe prints, nearly 2,500 pieces of evidence, and roughly 40,000 reports with more than 1 million pages documenting the investigation. A fresh inventory of all collected evidence was made available for investigative review, which would not have been possible without the assistance of the FBI. The Cold Case Review Panel gave us a lengthy list of recommendations, which we are continuing to work through and evaluate. And though that review may have ended, our collaboration with those entities continues to this day. I know that our community would like to know more information and specifics on our progress, but like any major criminal investigation, there is no way that we can share that information publicly without compromising the integrity of this case and any future prosecution by the district attorney's office. What I can tell you, though, is that we have thoroughly investigated multiple people identified as suspects throughout the years, and we continue to be open-minded about what occurred as we investigate the tips that come in to detectives. I can also tell you that detectives are regularly investigating some aspects of this terrible crime, and I receive updates frequently. We are hopeful that the renewed public attention will generate more tips, and we encourage anyone who has any information to contact our detectives at the following email: Boulder's Most Wanted at bouldercolorado.gov. In the interest of transparency, I also think it's important for the community to know that our department has had ongoing conversations with JonBenet's family, the last of which occurred in mid-2024, and we are committed to continued open dialogue. JonBenet would have been 34 years old this year. She deserved to grow up and live her life to the fullest. Instead, it was brutally taken from her. Of course, those who loved and knew JonBenet continue to grieve. This crime also haunts the Boulder community, especially every officer and detective who's ever been a part of this investigation. Every single one of them thinks about her and would love nothing more than to bring justice to her memory. I know the Boulder Police Department has not talked a lot about this investigation publicly, but that's, again, because no one wants to jeopardize any potential prosecution of a suspect. We must constantly balance the release of any information in an active and open investigation with the public's right and desire to know what's going on. To the extent that news coverage, documentaries, and miniseries keep JonBenet's memory alive and could perhaps spark new information, we welcome any coverage that might allow us to finally bring the killer or killers to justice. At the end of the day, we must not forget that regardless of everything that has or has not transpired since 1996, a 6-year-old girl is dead, and we will continue to do everything in our power, along with our partners, to solve this case. Ideally, we would be able to go back and prevent this awful crime from happening, but sadly we cannot. However, moving forward, we're committed to investigating every tip and lead that comes our way. I beg anyone that has information that has not been previously shared with us to contact us, and that includes those responsible for this crime. Please help us.
Scott Duffey, I mean, that was a very earnest plea, kind of bringing everyone up to date. You heard him say that they spoke to, I presume, John and maybe Burke Ramsey, the brother, as recently as 2024, which just passed us by. Now, in 2008, advancements in DNA technology that led to the discovery of some unknown male DNA on JonBenet's clothing, and John Ramsey has basically said, let's use IgG, investigative genetic genealogy, which is how they found the Golden State Killer. You got to assume that's being done. First, just your thoughts on the Chief's comments, and then your thoughts on IgG.
Yeah, so I'm appreciative that the chief put out a statement. It's coming from the chief. It's not coming from anybody else in some, at a party comment and so forth. So the fact that the chief now is setting a tone, very limited information, he's ultimately accepting that the department of old made major mistakes, as Phil has indicated, and there are things yet to be done. For example, IgG. So no doubt in my mind that the IgG is being done. What I would like to know in continuing on, that the DNA that is recovered, as we start to hear, where exactly is the DNA being recovered from? So I've read reports, whether they're true or not, obviously on the underwear, under the finger nails, clothing. What I would like to know is, are the three a match? Are they from one individual, and thereby continuing on the IgG, the investigative genealogy, looking for one, or are they all different? So things like that I would like to know, that I imagine law enforcement knows, And so thereby it lends a little bit more to that the DNA recovered will ultimately lead to the person responsible for this. Those are some of the things. So that's why I just say there should be some, as I would say, hey, DNA is a great thing, but what is that DNA ultimately going to lead to? Is it going to be a red herring that, hey, because the DNA recovered doesn't match anybody within the Ramseys and anybody else that's already been looked at, then thereby it's not them? Because in other words, is there blood? Is there skin? Is there cells and so forth? So there's just some of the things that I would ask, but absolutely agree. Take that genealogy as far as you can and try to determine what you have here. Some of the things that, as a investigator, that bother me with regards to the DNA is if you have somebody that went in, broke into that house, and then conducted whatever it is that they're including SA and ultimately the strangulation, and then of course the beating. I would be hard pressed to say that that individual hasn't been arrested for something else, and thereby their DNA is in CODIS in a national database, having been arrested and convicted elsewhere of another heinous but similar type crime. Those are some of the questions that I would have: is how is it that possible that something so serious that this individual has not done it again? And when I say done it again, in that there may be other similar incidents anywhere in the country that also do not provide a match. Those are the questions that I have that ultimately keep leading me, like as you go down a drain, it just keeps spiraling.
Yeah, it is fascinating. The DNA again was found in JonBenet's underwear mixed with her blood. But a lot of suspects apparently, according to investigators, were ruled out that shouldn't have been ruled out. I'm going to go back and forth between the timeline. I'm going to get Phil's take. 19. So this happens right at the end of 96. 97 is the meat of the investigation. The Boulder Police Department really starts kind of focusing mainly on the Ramseys, citing inconsistencies and also the ransom note, which they thought was peculiar. 1998 to 99 grand jury proceedings take place. A grand jury is convened, and they indict the John and Patsy Ramsey in 1999. But the district attorney, the DA at the time, declined to prosecute, citing insufficient evidence. And then we eventually get to a false confession that we'll talk about. Let me this video is all old here, but this is the detective who was first working the case, and let's watch this. It's an interesting, peculiar little bit of sound.
Gave them specific instructions not to touch anything. She says John Ramsey headed straight to the basement. She heard Fleet White scream for an ambulance, and then a chilling discovery. For Arndt, the pieces of the puzzle fell into place.
And I see John Ramsey carrying JonBenet up the last 3 steps from the basement. And my mind exploded. And everything that I had noted that morning that stuck out instantly made sense. And JonBenet was clearly dead. Then she's been dead for a while. I ordered him to put JonBenet down. I knelt next to her and I leaned down to her face. And John leaned down opposite me, and his face was just inches from mine. And we had a nonverbal exchange that I will never forget. And he asked if she was dead. And I said, yes, she's dead. And I told him to go back to the room and to dial 911. And as we looked at each other, I remember, and I wore a shoulder holster, tucking my gun right next to me and consciously counting, I've got 18 bullets.
Why did you do that?
Because I didn't know if we'd all be alive when people showed up. I said everything made sense in that instance. And I knew what happened.
Do you think your fear was well-founded?
You bet I do. There's no doubt in my mind.
To this day?
Never wavered.
You were afraid because you thought the killer was still in the house.
I knew it.
Absolutely?
Absolutely.
Fil Waters, Uncle Phil, shaking his head there. This is the detective who was first on scene there. I believe there was responding officers, maybe two, and then she gets there basically right away. Fil Waters, how come the shake of the head there? She is implying she knows who did it, and it sounds like she thinks it's Mr. Ramsey.
Well, let me first comment about the chief.
Yeah, please.
And I'm watching this interview here with the detective, and I watched the chief's statement from the perspective of a homicide detective in an interview room. And the chief, I agree with Scott, it's good that he has stepped up, kind of laid it out, and so forth. But what I noticed about that delivery was he didn't exactly exude confidence.
Yeah.
Yeah. And there was a lot of lip licking, a lot of it. There were a lot of deep breaths. I mean, it was palpable. I was like, wow. There was some shoulder shrugging. And so the message was a good one. The delivery, not so good, at least in my view.
I agree.
Based on what how I'm evaluating the statement itself.
Yeah.
And so, good for him. And I was encouraged to hear that they had, because my thought was when he was going on and on and on about how they were all screwed up, was that they need to get a set of eyes that has nothing to do with the Boulder Police Department. Put them together, give them everything, and let them go through it. And it sounds like that's what's happened with this cold case squad that they have assembled in Colorado in 2023, I think he said. So that is a good step forward. My concern is that the evidence has been so compromised that there will be no conclusion. A lot of speculation, but not a conclusion. Now, in regards to the detective, everything that I described when I was talking about the mistakes that were made, she is the moving picture example of why that investigation was so atrocious. I was just struck, and again, I'm looking at the interview based on an interviewer. Oh my gosh, could she have been any more melodramatic? I mean, the wide eyes, oh yes, this and that. I mean, it's like she was telling she was reading a noir novel of some kind about a homicide that occurred. The acting and it comes off as being lacking in sincerity. To me, it was a reflection of her incompetence. This business about putting her, she wore a jackass rig, and so she put her arm on it, and she didn't. I mean, really? That's what you would think? That's what you would be doing? Amazing to me. And then the dramatic discussion: is she dead? Yes, she's dead. I mean, I'm sorry, but unless this is an audition for some series somewhere,
yeah, I mean,
not impressed at all at her the way she communicated what she did, and then when she's explaining what she did, again, it just revealed her utter incompetence.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, Phil, if you got, let me ask you this: if you arrived on scene there, would you have told John Ramsey to leave the house? What would have happened?
Well, again, this goes back to the first thing that you would do, the first thing I would do, and if I'm the homicide cop responding to the kidnapping,
Yeah.
I would have expected the patrol officer to have secured, however many people were there, that they would be secured. And I say, not allowed to leave. They're there. And no discussion. We're going to sit here and wait till homicide arrives. Now, once the detectives arrive, I've got to get a briefing from the primary officer. I've got to determine who he's talked to, what they have told him, and who are going to be my most viable witnesses to this thing. If you've got people that showed up afterwards, then they need to go. You get some statements from them, probably get a recorder and get a brief audio statement from them, and then send them on their way, because now they are in the way. They serve no purpose. Now, the primary's there. We've got the parents, the brother, and any other people that were there overnight in the house. They get sent down to homicide to take written sworn statements from. You get them interviewed, but you're going to get them locked into a statement. And they're going to sign it, and they're going to swear to it, and there's going to be a perjury clause on it. So these are the things that you do. You separate that out. Now, once you've got the scene cleared of everyone, then you're going to have to bring in a crime scene unit. We've got this piece of evidence, this note. We may have some other areas where her bedroom is. We may want to go in there, take swabs and so forth and so on. And we are going to be, and at some point in time there is going to be a search of the house. But it's going to be done by law enforcement personnel, not by the family, not by just random people roaming around, and all of a sudden, oh, here's a place we didn't look before, and look what we have. We have a dead little girl. So it's going to have to be a very regimented, disciplined processing of that scene. Now, all those people that are there, and you've got this, there's this talk about this DNA that has been, to this date, has been unidentifiable. Well, in the circumstances under which this did occur, and they may have done it, but in my mind, they're going to have to take DNA samples of every person that was in that house at the time. Every one of them. Everyone that showed up, every cop that showed up, everyone is going to have to get swabbed. Because you're going to have to eliminate all of, because there's no telling. I mean, that could have been DNA that John Ramsey had on him, and it was transferred. I mean, there's all sorts of reasons why, but that DNA needs to be identified. And of course, I'm like everybody else has been commenting on here, is why have we not gone into the genealogy, to the genealogical DNA, and see if we got anything going? Now, maybe they have, and they have not found anything. I mean, that's possible.
Yeah.
So I'm just saying that the detective in this thing, oh my gosh, I'm just embarrassed. That's an embarrassing interview in terms of a law enforcement professional talking about that case. And that's one of these cases that we call in the business, that's a career case. That is a career case right there.
Yeah.
And she blew it.
By the way, does anyone know where she is? And good news for Phil, we have 2 more clips from her. I actually went out of chronological order, so I'm going to play what should have been the first clip from her in a moment. Here, how about John Mark Carr? He was the creepy dude. I think they went to Thailand to get him, made a chilling confession, which is just, that's a whole other story, why people do this. The DNA didn't match. There were a few other.
That was a guy wanting attention.
Yeah.
That's what that was.
Yeah, it's a weird dude right there. John Ramsey to ABC News said, JonBenet is still my 6-year-old blonde-headed daughter who I love dearly. I did run into one of her little friends on the street who is now, 30 and an adult. And it was a little bit of a shock. This little girl played with JonBenet at our house all the time. And that was a little bit of a jolt to think, wow, that could have been JonBenet. She was robbed of her life. John Ramsey is now 81 years old. He was the prime suspect for 12 years. Eventually, the Boulder DA exonerated the family. Let me play this piece of sound, and then I'm going to come to Scott about cold cases, the fact that someone just commented that there was no DNA on, no family DNA on JonBenet, which is interesting. But this is the detective who arrived on scene, and this is the first of 3 sound bites. I played you the second already. This is the first one.
He says, could you please cover her body? And as he's saying it, he's already put the blanket on top of her.
Arndt would later be harshly criticized for 2 key decisions, asking John Ramsey to search the house and allowing John Ramsey to place the blanket on JonBenet's body.
You had to know that that was going to contaminate evidence.
JonBenet's body was in and of itself a crime scene. Would it be nice if John hadn't found JonBenet? Absolutely. And would it be nice if he hadn't put a blanket? Yeah, it would be great. And it would be nice if there were other people to help control and keep people away. That would have been wonderful. But that's not the circumstances that I had available that day.
Still alone in the living room with John Ramsey, Arndt then heard Patsy Ramsey's voice.
And I heard a wail, just a guttural moan, aching wail from the back area. It's probably one of the most pitiful things I've ever heard, and anguished. And I saw the rest of the people, the Patsy and the pastor and the 4 friends, come from the den towards the living room. So I said, if you want to say goodbye to JonBenet, this is the only time you'll have to do it.
That wasn't the end of it, but I guess the COE may have just stopped there, or it did end right there. Again, Phil's shaking his head. Scott Duffey is not shaking his head. You heard there, Scott Duffey. They allowed John to search the. I mean, this is a potential suspect. They allowed him to search the house, allowed him to cover his own deceased daughter with a blanket. These are the Keystone cops here, Scott Duffey. So I'll let you criticize them, but you're a guy that's very active and interested in cold cases. I mean, like, how do you start your work now, 28, 29 years later? First, answer the question about, the fact that John was allowed to search the house and cover her and all that.
Yeah, I think you can go into the hundreds of pieces of missteps. And Phil's done great with regards to just pointing out a few of them, and there are so many more. And if I can, with regards to the statement of this detective, first and foremost, I don't know why she is talking to the media, um, and I'm sure whether one of you two know or somebody, was she already removed from the police department in 1999, and is she just talking
I
because she can?
I believe the answer was yes. I'm curious, does anyone know where she is today? But go ahead. Scott.
And then she, as Phil talking with regards to her statements, she does contradict herself, which to me is pretty loud with regards to she clutched her gun close because she's fearing that nobody's going to be alive, but yet she is giving him orders to leave the room and go dial 911. So if she's so fearful that he is the killer, and that could potentially do harm to others right there in the room, you're not going to let him out of sight. I've never ever gone into any type of home search warrant, whatever, and if somebody I believe is going to do harm, I'll be like, hey, go get a sandwich for me or something. I've never allowed anybody to go retrieve anything once I entered into a home without an escort, official police escort. And if I'm the only detective, as she said, they were low on resources, then everybody is staying there with me. So that's that's why I'm not quite sure what she's talking about. But I think it also lends credibility to everybody who has their questions with regards to law enforcement, and their particular initial handling of this case. It was ineptitude. It was a whole host of things that ultimately, I think, leads us to a very reasonable explanation as to why this case remains unsolved today. And worse so, even if you come with a suspect, why it probably could never be prosecuted.
Hmm.
Um,
Well,
so,
Scott, let
go
me
ahead.
ask you this. So I'm going to ask Phil this. Let's say the Boulder police chief is watching Surviving the Survivor, which I know he does religiously, and he's like, "Wow, these two guys are incredibly smart." And he says, "I want retired FBI agent, special agent Scott Duffey." You get mad, by the way, when they just say agent and not special agent.
No,
No, you don't. COE, I sent you some photos. I'm hoping that you can put in there for later in the show. But so Scott Duffey, the Boulder police chief sees you and Phil. His reputation precedes him as America's most respected detective. They bring the two of you in. You're flown in a private plane. The FBI pays for it. You and Phil get to Boulder. What is the first thing you do?
I think it's important that Phil and I have a good meal. That that's
Paid
first and
for by
foremost.
the people that are sending us to
Correct.
Boulder. Yes.
By the way, I sort of wish this really happened. We should STS. Let's get Boulder to hire these two guys as independent. Phil got his own. He has his own investigation firm. Go ahead, Scott. I'm sorry, getting excited now.
Yeah, it's ultimately, you have to it's a brand new investigation. So I appreciated listening to him, the chief, at least in with regards to digitizing, putting everything, making it searchable. So that's first and foremost, as opposed to going through lots of bankers boxes and kind of just looking through things, notes and whatnot. Um, so it would be as if we're going to the actual location. I would like to visit the location because it's one thing to hear the body was found here, this search was done there. I would like to know what were the actual first steps done and take me on that tour. I want to see the house myself, and whoever's the homeowner get permission to say, hey, I would like to do. So I would like to get the lay of I would like to do tests, as I think the Netflix film did. If something is going on at this part of the house, is it possible that family members or anybody cannot be in earshot? Is it possible? So I would like to know, um, if in fact she's removed from her bed voluntarily or not, if she's walking with this individual, if in fact we're going with the stranger, um, potential abduction and homicide, is it possible that all this could be taking place where the victim is not talking, screaming, whatever? And I would like, and so I would just start there, having been an outsider, very curious as to this whole investigation, to come in with a common sense approach. These are the questions I had back then as I listened to all these interviews come out, and the investigation leaning towards the family, and then not leaning towards the family, and so forth. So I would drown out everything that's ever been said publicly, um, and come in it as if this was December 26, 1996, and be able to say common sense wise, hey, I have a question of that. Is it possible? Oh, it is possible that somebody could be talking very loud downstairs and not be heard at any other part of the house. So things like that. Because to hear that they were all awake and then maybe they weren't awake, I would like to know very simple things like that, and follow it through a common sense approach, answer the questions that I have over the years, and then to be able to piece things together and look at those interviews, look at everything that's been put together, and be able to start drawing, hey, this doesn't meet the common sense, this doesn't meet the face test. So start putting together the things that I would like to take a deeper dive into, and kind of, day one, and then go through the investigation, and look at all the evidence and kind of say, this is helpful, this is not helpful, or this is indifferent. And that's what it would take, a total new set of eyes, and only allowing Boulder Police Department and the investigation to be an assistance, to where I would say, hey, for the sake of perception, you cannot be a part of this other than you assisting by giving us everything we need to know.
Sorry about that. I forgot to unmute myself. I said that was a very interesting, thoughtful take, and I want to get Phil's take in just a moment. As most of you know, I have a very opinionated mother, for lack of a better way to say it. I even wrote a book about her, and it is called A Brutally Honest Conversation. But she's not the only one. What I love about this show is I like to be honest. Instagram is for people who think that the world is all rainbows and unicorns. It is a perfect world out there. Look at me in my estate. Look at me here. Look at me there. But what really goes on behind the scenes is this text message from the CEOE, which I just saw. And this is from the beginning of the show when I'm talking about the fires. Joel, wrap this SHIT. Focus on the show. WTF. I hate your stupid questions that force politics. You're a moron. And then she says the other videos were first in chronological order. So I just want to bring everybody into my world, because if it's not my beloved mother yelling at me, it is my beloved COE. And the only way I can defend myself is by throwing them both under the bus and publicly shaming them, which is what I just did. Fil Waters, if you were hired with Scott Duffey, you two would actually be a great team. Where do you start 28, 29 years after the fact?
Well, exactly where Scott talked about, a fine meal before we actually get to the meat of this thing. Well, just as what Scott has said, I mean, it's one of these things where we would walk into it. We're going to be objective, even in what we know. We're going to have to enter it as I did every homicide scene, not predisposed to a conclusion, no matter how many conclusions have been made about this particular case over the last 28 years or so. So We enter it that way. We start afresh. We go to the scene Scott's talked about. I mean, all the things that Scott's lined out here, we start forming our own timeline about what happened. We start looking at the evidence we would have collected at the time and see if it was collected. And if it was collected, where did that get disposed of? What was tested? What was not tested? Where is that evidence now? Do they still have it? And regarding evidence, you know, this detective has her put a blanket over JonBenet's rant. Well, she's just destroyed the trace evidence factor of that investigation. You don't know where the blanket came from. You don't know how many people have used that blanket. You don't know where that blanket has been, and yet you put it on a dead body and destroy trace evidence. And that may be where this DNA came from. So, gosh, I mean, so many missteps, just idiotic. And then you start to move in the direction the evidence leads you. And you take each piece of that evidence, and if you start to see a common thread taking you in one direction, then you pursue that. And if you get to the end of that and it doesn't reveal what you thought it was going to, then you get the next piece of evidence and see where that starts to lead you. So it's all about the trail of evidence and which direction it's going to go. And it's going to take time. And of course, you're going to evaluate the case because you want to see the initial report and the supplements to that. So you want to see what they did at the beginning of this thing, and is there anything that was missed? And if there was something that happened that you can write down in the column of, you know, you make a column, you put it up on the board, you know, good, bad. They did this was good. They did this was bad. And you start trying to decipher what you have on the good side and what may have been compromised because of what happened on the bad side. So this is not a quick fix, certainly. Cold cases, it's very rare that they are, because of the DNA, because of the advances in DNA technology and so forth. Cold cases are a lot of times are going to be focused on the DNA. That's what gets these cold cases solved. So, but then once you start building your timeline and seeing who was talked to, who was there, it's going to be tedious. But if those people are still alive today, they need to be interviewed. And that would be including this detective, if she would agree to an interview. Wow. You would need to go back and re-interview John Ramsey, interview the brother. I mean, everybody that you can speak with would need to be spoken to.
Steve Cohen, get John Ramsey and Burke on this show with Fil Waters and Scott. It would be the that might be the Super Bowl halftime show right there.
If you want to see what John Ramsey's going to do, watch Netflix. Watch the documentary.
Yeah,
that came out. So, you know, I've not met Mr. Ramsey, but I have seen him in the green room at I want to say maybe 2 of the crime cons that I was
really
performing at, you know, presenting at. So.
If I was him and I saw you, I'd be running the other direction. I'll tell you that.
Well, and he's, you know, I did not meet him. I happened to be standing there when I overheard him just speaking to people, and he's, you know, he's a congenial man. You know, he's a nice guy, and been through a lot, regardless of what people may think about him. the fact that what did you say? He's 81 now.
81.
That's incredible that he has managed to stay in pretty good health over this period of time with that kind of an onus on him.
Yeah.
But anyway, to finish up the question, I mean, it's like Scott has talked about, and it would be it would be very meticulous. I mean, it's gonna be time consuming, a lot of effort, but again, the critical factor here would be entering it objectively and letting evidence lead you where you need to be.
Scott Duffey. So there was also a garrote, which is thank you to NJ Kathy. Phil, I agree with you. BTK would use a garrote to strangle his victims. A garrote was found there. That seems obviously out of place for a inner family killing. And then you've got this brother who not so long ago did an interview that we can't air because of copyright restrictions, but Dr. Phil did it with Burke, who was 9 years old at the time. I mean, Scott, I guess my question for you, the garrote obviously stands out, but just back to Phil, what he was just saying, if you could get in an interview room with, let's just start with John, how would you approach the interview with him now?
Yeah, so totally agree. As we are taking this from step one, it would be a total introduction, rapport building. I would throw the blame on all those that from day one to at some point where he decides, hey, we're not just suspects, because every family member knows if you're there at the crime scene that you are a suspect, and you're and not only as an investigator but as a family member who wants to participate in being exonerated, being, hey, do whatever you need to do to determine that I am not your individual. So and whatever it is, will be cooperative, supportive, etc. What do you need? I'll get it for you. And so thereby would, looking at this 28 years later, it would be, I need to do this as if this is day one, and explain it to them and let them know, while offering them, hey, I would agree as an outsider that you were treated probably differently, and so I can see of all the I would let them know, I've seen all your interviews, and so how can I establish that trust to say, give me everything you would give me day one, as if it was December 26, 96. But this is the approach I would be taking, to where I am there equally as somebody who is an investigator, somebody who is supportive of them, somebody who is empathetic to them, while at the same time being 100% objective, to where, let me do every step I can in order to remove you from the crime scene, and then move to the next step. So that's why I think the family continues to be in this interlocking, because I'm not sure they have done or allowed law enforcement to say, can we remove you once and for all, even though Patsy can, she'll be forever sealed in whatever suspicion at the time of her death, because she's not able to be re-interviewed. I would think, what would I do if I was the FBI agent responding? It would be like, okay, answer every question that I have. And then, can I move you to the next step of being cleared in this investigation? And that is through a polygraph. Yes. And then have them meet with an FBI polygrapher, and then allow the FBI, as I remain out of it, then allow the polygrapher to say, Scott, I can't clear them. I can't do this. I can't do that because of this or that. So to me, it's an empathetic rapport building, trust building, even though they have 28 years of harboring that Colorado was out to get us from the get-go, and they never really cared about seeking her killer. I would try. I have to counter 28 years of that.
Leo Wren, what would be the whole motive for the parents killing her? Obviously, a huge question. There was an investigator who passed away, private investigator named Lou Smith. He was brought into the case by then Boulder District Attorney Alex Hunter. He was confident, he said before passing, that the Ramseys were innocent, felt that the Boulder police had tunnel vision, and felt they should be looking for an intruder. This is his quote. I'm not saying parents don't kill their kids. Parents do kill their children. But the police are trying to say Patsy did it. Their actions before, during, and after JonBenet's death are all consistent with innocent people. They didn't do it. Again, he believes it was an intruder. He died in 2010 of colon cancer. He passed the files on to his surviving children, has a spreadsheet with 887 names of potential suspects. It's a very slow process because they have to, the time and cost involved in locating these people, Phil, and then also obtaining their DNA and then testing it. Fil Waters, how would you, I mean, would you track down these 887 names that this guy Lou Smith, SMIT, came up with, or would you just totally take this under your wing, start from square one, create your own suspect list, and do it your way?
Well, let me say this. The focus of in this investigation is no different of a homicide cop is to let the evidence lead them where they need to be to discover who the right person is who did the wrong thing. This business about trying to prove that the Ramseys didn't do it is ridiculous. You don't enter an investigation to prove somebody didn't do something. You enter the investigation. You don't enter into these things, again, predisposed to a conclusion. Now, in a case like this, where it is within a family unit, it is always the family, the closest people to that person who is dead. They are going to be the first people looked at. And if you want to categorize them as suspects, that's what they're going to be at the onset of an investigation. Then through the investigation, if they are determined that they are not a suspect any longer, then they will be cleared out and we won't spend any more time on them. And so what happened here is that if this was the goal of this detective or these other detectives that were involved in this case was to prove that the Ramsey didn't do it, or to prove that the Ramseys did do it, well, then they got the whole point of this investigation in the wrong place anyway. That's not why you conduct an investigation, to prove somebody did it. Once you have the evidence that is leading you to this viable suspect, then you continue to accumulate that evidence that brings them into a clearer picture as being the suspect. So, again, it's unfortunate, but this whole scene gets destroyed because of a lack of experience. And I'm not saying that's anybody's fault. It's just that's where it was. They're not accustomed with investigating this type of a scene. So my question there is, knowing that, and I would expect that Chief Kobe would have recognized this right off the bat. And I don't know, my thinking, if I were the chief and did not have that experience on my department, then I would go to someone who does. So if that means going to the state and whatever investigative division they have within the state police, or if they have a Colorado Bureau of Investigation, but the people that do investigate these types of scenes, and you bring in reinforcement. The FBI, had this been worked as it should have been, as a kidnapping, the FBI would already be in place. So you would then have the FBI as support, still going to be a Boulder PD case. And I worked a myriad of cases that were HPD homicide cases, but had the FBI in there in support. And we had a great bunch of FBI agents in Houston, Texas, that were on the crim side of the FBI and were fantastic. Never told us no. And so, again, I don't know why that decision wasn't made, because it's clear. And once this thing started getting out of control, why it just continued to go on. I mean, good grief! It was like it just kept getting worse. So at some point in time, the leadership should have said, "Okay, stop. Bring in." Again, these agencies that have got the experience to investigate this type of a scene. So again, the focus doesn't need to be on proving that the Ramseys didn't do it, or that Burke did it, or didn't do it, or whatever. So the whole focus on this thing has been completely off kilter. And to answer your question, would I go, would Scott and I go and interview 887 people or whatever this guy came up with? Well, you know what? If we get led up to that and we take a look at what he developed, then we would determine whether or not is this viable, or is this just a huge waste of time? And was he just earning his hourly rate? So his billable hours. So, but again, trying to answer these kinds of questions kind of outside of what we don't know, kind of tough. But I think overall, I think Scott and I are in agreement. I mean, we would hit the ground running. It'd be a fresh look and objectively undertaken. And again, I keep saying it, but it's letting the evidence lead us where we need to be.
Yeah. You see this comment here. Steve Thomas was awful. This is our final piece of sound. A couple more very quick questions, maybe a couple of fun little stories, and we'll wrap it up. This is like filmed off of a TV, like with a phone on a TV. It's horribly bad footage, but you get the idea. This was Larry King Live, may he rest in peace, the man who asked questions in 3 or 4 words, which I liked. Here you go.
Absolutely.
And say slap her or hit her, or
I don't know. I'm suggesting that there was an explosive encounter because Patsy at one point put the child in clothes, a red turtleneck, for example, not the same clothing she was found in deceased the following day. I think something happened in that bathroom.
Right. What would lead then to garroting and hitting on the head? What would lead
I
to
don't
that?
know. What can you imagine would lead to garroting or hitting on the head?
What can you imagine? I can't imagine. I want you to look at me and tell me what you think happened.
Patsy, I'll look you right in the eye. I think you're good for this. I think that's what the evidence suggests.
Steve Thomas, you are
So in other words, she killed her daughter in a rage over the bedwetting and then garroted her.
Yeah, this is interesting hearing this theory because, again, it's not consistent with forensic experts that worked with the police department, law enforcement in this case. Right.
I disagree. Totally disagree. JonBenet, in fact, the autopsy report says this. JonBenet died of strangulation. That
Where
is
am I supposed
consistent
to have learned
with our
how to
theory.
make this garrote?
John calls it a very skilled instrument of some sort. It was. You admit now, do you not, that it was your paintbrush that was used? Do you admit that?
I don't know.
Steve,
Well, no, I care. Let her answer the question,
If
John.
the perpetrator was in our home, he
You're-
had
you're a paintbrush.
access. He had access.
The kidnapper who forgot his ransom note,
Steve,
the kidnapper who forgot
what do
his
you think
pen
the
and all his
perpetrator
tools
was
of the
doing
instruments.
there?
You know what? This isn't. We're not going to solve this tonight, and I refuse to have a Jerry Springer type exchange
It's
with
not.
this man.
It's not.
You know, this has subverted justice in this country like nothing in the history of the Constitution of this country. If we have had now 2 detectives from the Boulder Police Department. First, Detective Arndt comes on and emphatically, as emphatic as Mr. Thomas is this evening, says that John Ramsey was the murderer. She could see it in his eyes the day that we found JonBenet. Now, Mr. Thomas, as emphatic, but with yet another idea of how this happened, says that Patsy is the murderer.
Well, would you agree, Patsy, that almost none of it makes sense?
You're right. It
None
was
of
an
it.
evil.
What was the guy doing? Why did the
This is
intruder
a
do this?
man.
Evil
I don't know,
person.
but when we find out,
And
God
we
willing, we'll
when we
know.
find this creature.
But this person stalks the streets. I don't mean to be
Yes,
too
he does.
Absolutely.
maudlin here, but
Yes,
there's
he
someone out
does.
there.
Well, somebody better get worried about it because there are children in this country that are just as vulnerable
To your
as
know-
JonBenet
I got to get a
was.
break. I want to ask you when we come back, to your knowledge, are the Boulder police still working on other suspects? We'll be right back. Don't go away.
What an exchange. Larry King, man, that guy was a legend. Phil's literally trying to hide. Scott Duffey, you have, I mean, this is just crazy. You got the detective with the potential suspects, who I guess eventually were exonerated, but literally telling them to their face that the mother did it. I mean, it kind of defies everything you're taught as an investigator. Now, would that be something I would say? Yes, but I'm not an investigator. But you, I know, would always keep an open mind. I guess this guy, Steve Thomas, got to the point where he's like, I know that they did it, and I'm just going to tell them to their face. What do you make of that exchange?
It was for shows, for ratings. It's I would not have participated in that. The detective should have known and accepted that, hey, maybe I can on air get one of those 2 to say something and forever be recorded. It just another piece that lends to the lack of any part of the investigation being credible. It just continues to add to the insult, regardless of what you believe. Or it was a sad display of I can't even I don't even know how he participated in that. That's what I come down to.
Yeah. Scott Duffey, how common, people have been asking about this. I mean, ransom notes are something you see in a movie. In your career at the FBI, 20-something years, how many ransom notes did you deal with?
Yeah, so I dealt with none, but having done research and to see that, yeah, you look for the anomalies, you look for, I think there are very, very few ransom notes in history. And of course, the most prominent as in this that's on display in this museum is the Lindbergh kidnapping. And so you just go with what you do know, right? You take patterns for what they are. They're helpful, and you allow research to add to an investigation, but it is something that you have to accept. Hey, there's so little that you allow it to be um, a voice that's saying maybe look here, look there, but you can't look at that note and say, aha, no ransom note is 4 pages long with all this. It's leading me back to the Ramseys. So it's again, it's amazing to see what this note has done to, I think, further um, the investigators into whatever it is that they were leading to. It just very, very mind-boggling, right? It's a piece of evidence. It's there. It's been presented by the Ramseys to investigators, saying this is what we saw on our stair step, and so here it is, and for that to be like taking law enforcement further away to an understanding of where this is, just another sad piece of a misstep in law enforcement, in my opinion. I know I've read both from an FBI investigative standpoint, forensically and whatnot, that there are people who say, yes, this is written by Patsy, thereby it's Patsy. And then others who say no. And what does that do to me as an investigator? Because I'm not a handwriting analysis and so forth. I'd be like, so I have experts on both sides giving me contradicting opinions. Thereby, I have to set that aside and say, well, that's for later then. If you're not finding DNA, handwriting analysis and everything to point to one person, then that's a piece that's confusing and thereby not helping me as an investigator who's looking for experts that are outside of my purview to say, tell me, is this leading me to one person, or is it something that I just have to shelf because it's not helpful? I'm not getting good answers from my experts.
So just to put a bow on this, and we're going to get Phil's take too, but John Mark Carr was another suspect who was ruled out because of DNA back in 2006. Guy named Bill McReynolds, who was a family friend. He was a Santa Claus performer. He apparently had a fascination with JonBenet, and details about a prior loss of his own daughter that raised suspicions. There was no evidence ultimately linking him to the crime. Gary Oliva, who is a convicted sex offender. He's a known pedophile living in Boulder at the time of JonBenet's murder. He was arrested in 2000 on unrelated charges. And in 2016, a former associate claimed that Oliva had confessed to JonBenet's killing, but DNA evidence did not link him to the crime. No charges filed. Then there's a guy named Michael Helgoth, a local electrician. He died by unaliving himself in 1997, shortly after authorities announced they were closing in on a suspect, but there was no physical evidence found there either. And then this whole unidentified intruder theory, which would leave it wide open. By the way, another fire has broken out in LA during this podcast in Granada Hills, which is in the valley, I believe. And so thoughts continue to go out to them. Fil Waters, there's one guy who unalived himself. That's curious to me when he heard that suspects were closing in, but he, again, no evidence there. I got to ask you, Fil Waters, and you're probably going to tell me to get lost. What does your gut tell you in this case?
About a suspect?
Yeah.
Doesn't tell me anything. I don't know enough about, I'm not going to make any, I'm not going to say anything like that. I mean, I haven't looked at this case at what
I tried, everybody. I knew he was going to say this. I tried.
What I've seen on the interwebs and watched this Netflix thing and the stuff that occurred at the beginning of this thing, and I wouldn't have any opinion about it. I think this case has been so screwed up at this point that to even suggest that, well, I have a hunch that it's this person. And that's what this guy, there was an interesting thing about watching that interview on Larry King. Number one, I'm with Scott. That detective's an idiot for getting up on that. And didn't he write a book?
I don't know.
Didn't that detective write a book? Maybe it was another case, but did he, am I thinking of another case, or did he end up getting sued? At some point?
I know some news outlets ended up getting sued. I don't know about him.
Well, that guy in particular on that was all theater. The Ramseys, of course, are going to agree to get on there because it's just going to give them another platform to tell their story. But the detective getting on there and he made an interesting statement, which I thought he said the evidence suggests. Really? Okay. Well, I don't think I've ever put anybody in prison or on death row because the evidence suggested something about them.
Yeah.
The evidence tied them directly as an affirmative link to whatever they did. So this parsing of terms and that was another atrocious interview on the part of law enforcement. That never should have happened. And
by the way,
I would even if Larry King had called me, if he'd have come to the house and offered me a steak dinner at Taste of Texas, I'd have said no after we had the dinner, but I still would have said no.
There you go. He did write a book. Apparently, he was also selling it at the time of the Larry King interview.
Okay, well, there you go. He's on a freaking book tour, which you ought to be familiar with, Joel.
Yeah, I am familiar with that.
Because you did write a book, right?
I did write a book.
Yes, you did.
I don't like to talk about it, though, Phil.
I know you don't.
That's pretty much it, Scott Duffey. I want to get your final take, and then we'll get to some final thoughts as I go through a little less disturbing and jolting news. Your final thoughts on this, Scott Duffey. My final question to you: will this ever be solved?
I never like to say never. Never like to say never.
Right. Never say never.
I will say I am hopeful that law enforcement will come up with, at the very least, identities of the ones, if there's more than one DNA sample recovered, that they will have them identified at some point and be able to say something that leads to why the DNA was there. But I feel two different. Prosecution is, in my opinion, almost impossible. Just because there's so much there for any defense attorney to be able to muddy the waters from what has been done. But I do hope for justice. Justice. It's gosh, it's I don't see this coming to a courtroom. I can say that.
There you go.
Just to piggyback on what Scott just said, complete agreement. That's the problem here. This case is so freaking screwed up that even if you thought you had the right person, the evidence led you to that person, prosecuting this case, I think almost impossible. And the defense, because I can't think of a piece of evidence that's going to separate that person out as distinctly unique to the case. It's so convoluted at this point and such an oleo of crap. It's going to be hard to get through it to get to that right person who's done the wrong thing to JonBenet. And here's my other comment. What is sad to me about this entire episode is what's getting lost in this is her, is JonBenet. And so the focus is on everybody else but her. And it's gotten lost. And that's the saddest part of an investigation like this, botched at the very beginning.
So that is a wrap. I'm glad we did this. Phil, Scott, and I went back and forth a little bit. I thought it would be interesting. And in fact, it was absolutely interesting. Phil was like, I don't know what I have to say about it. But Phil always has something interesting to say, as does Scott. And we'll circle back to it. Who knows? Now that we did the show, next week there'll be some sort of press conference that they've got a suspect. So stay tuned. Very quickly, we are doing another show at 3:00. COE is not too happy with me, so I don't know how much help I'm going to have on that 3:00 show, but I'm doing it. And could be a long weekend for me, everybody. Before we say goodbye, I know Phil's going to have something to say about this. Just in other news, Fil Waters, at least 20 people, the number is rising, have now been arrested in L.A. for looting Your thoughts on that, Fil Waters?
Of course.
That's a good answer. Fil Waters, the Kansas City Chiefs fan's death. We did that story. It was a year ago. The family is besides themselves. They say that nothing has been done. The police investigation has not moved forward. A former homicide detective, not affiliated with Kansas City, says he believes that criminal charges are still possible. Does the family have a right to be incredulous a year later? These are the three fans who wound up dead, frozen to death outside a friend's home. Justice moves slowly. Phil, what would you say to the families?
Well, yes, it does. And if there's any criminal charges, based on what I remember about that discussion, the only criminal charges that I could see is if there's a statute that allows for whoever sold them the fentanyl. I think they had fentanyl in their system and a variety of other drugs. Whoever made those substances gave them to them or sold them to them, then they could pursue a criminal charge against those people. But look, it was a tragic incident that was a result of bad choices made by those three people. So I'm sorry, but it doesn't make the pain any less. But by golly, thinking that you're going to get a pound of flesh from somebody, I just don't think that's going to happen. And that's why this thing, I would be surprised if there are ever any charges in that case. And if there are, it's going to be along the lines of what I just spoke about. But terrible, terrible tragedy. But that's a victim precipitated event.
There you go. A couple of final. We'll end on a nice note. Scott Duffey, I'm wondering if this is you or an idea you ever had. They say keep Portland weird, Portland, Oregon, but this is Bend, Oregon, and there's artwork all along the city. And now the artwork around the city, someone has put on large googly eyes. Those things where the eyes are like the moves up and down. People are mystified. They don't know. Is this something you would ever consider, Scott Duffey, putting googly eyes onto existing artwork?
Yeah, so somebody, right, is leaving their mark on these paintings in a form of vandalism. Is that?
Yeah.
What I like as an investigator standpoint, that it's one person or a group, and so thereby, as opposed to somebody just randomly committing acts of vandalism on different things, different posts, or whether it be paint, or the fact that somebody is leaving their mark, they want to be caught, they're making a statement, and so stay tuned, because if there is an active investigation, depending on the type of artwork, as opposed to is it lousy artwork, it's probably an easier find. And that person, more than likely, as I've done some acts of vandalism in this, investigations, when somebody goes around leaving their mark, they are eventually caught, because they're leaving their marks elsewhere, and perhaps on some of their homework. So it will be
there you
determined.
go. A final beautiful story. This one is I picked out especially for Phil, because he is a religious man. Christmas has passed, Fil Waters, but at the Berlin Zoo, the Christmas presents are just being given out. The elephants, they are being given the leftover Christmas trees as food. They tear off the branches with their trunks. They lob them into their mouths. The zoo only takes fresh, unsold trees from vendors. It does not accept trees from the public, which could contain chemicals or leftover decorations. But the Christmas trees that are left over are going into the mouths of hungry elephants. your final thoughts on this, your final thoughts on everything. I got to wrap it up because I got to do another show in 32 minutes.
Well, I like to learn something new every day. And so what I've learned today is that elephants eat Christmas trees.
It is true. There you go. You heard it here first. Elephants eat Christmas trees. You learn strange things when you watch Surviving the Survivor. I'm literally posting the show right now for 3:00. It's going to be Tim Jansen, Joe Patuto, and yours truly. There's some breaking news with Donna Adelson and Rob Adelson. Scott Duffey, everyone's asking why you look red. I believe it's just because of the combination of the green screen and the light. I don't think Scott is sunburned because it's is it snowing in Philadelphia, Scott?
No, and it did a few days ago. I think Monday, kids were off, and some about an inch precipitation were expected. Snow tonight. So
there you go.
I'm also sitting in a different chair, so that could be why.
I like it. It looks like you're well rested and sunburned.
Scott, if you put a couple of horns right there,
yeah,
you'll be ready for Halloween.
Yeah, it'd be perfect. It'll be perfect. Fil Waters, I assume it's pizza night, Bible study, or did things switch up now that you're back in Texas?
Well, grilled hamburgers tonight.
There you go, grilled hamburgers. On
Texas,
that note,
Texas, it's grilled hamburgers. Hawaii, it's pizza.
Love you, America. Love you, Houston. Love you, the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania.
Keep those folks in California and LA in your prayers, folks.
100%. There's another fire, like I said, that broke out. And there was just LA breaking news thing I saw where the reservoirs weren't even connected or hooked up to serve the Pacific Palisades in case of fire, which is just, in my opinion, a criminal act, but we'll see where that goes. And we'll be back at 3:00. Breaking news with Donna Adelson regarding Rob Adelson. See you in a bit.